of revenue by Twitter in the Nigerian economy, in the overall, what's it called, the overall picture, the overall revenue bucket, possibly insignificant, but irrespective, I mean, a business is a business, no matter what comes from there. If they were not interested in what comes from here, they definitely wouldn't even have gone to the negotiation table. So, yeah, I believe that is a two-way thing. We lost, Twitter lost. Thank God we are back now. But aside numbers, it was very bad for Nigeria's PR, Nigeria's position as a democratic entity, as a democratic state that that is a signatory to global conventions around freedom of speech, around human rights, and around access to information.
All right, so let's look at the numbers now. So NetBlocks, the Global Internet Monitoring Organization, has a cost of shutdown tool that basically calculates how internet restrictions and shutdowns cost. For Nigeria, it estimated that the country lost 104.02 million naira, about $250,600 every hour to the ban, giving you a total of about 2.46 billion every day. And that would be devastating for any economy. But it's also estimated that there are around 3 million Nigerians, 3.1 million Nigerians active on Twitter. So when you look at the numbers, do you think these numbers actually correlate? Because where is the money that Nigerians are making on Twitter? Because a lot of people would also question what's being done on Twitter that's bringing in this large amount of revenue.
No, I don't. I mean, without trying to undermine income that comes from social media, I think that some of those numbers are overstated because if you look at, what's the size of the total, digital economy in Nigeria? It's just about 15% of our total economic size, right? And our total economic size is just about 430 billion USD. I think that those numbers are overstated. However, I also know that quite a lot of income, exchange hands, a lot of revenue exchange hands on Twitter, on Facebook, and other social media platforms. I know, for example, that the entire media space now rely on Twitter to drive narratives as the primary source of driving narratives, and then they circulate those narratives even via traditional platforms. So as against traditional platforms being the original source of creating narratives, now media agencies, media houses try to generate those conversations via Twitter, and then they circulate it via digital platforms. You also have content creators, you have brands who are doing promotions, you have influencers, getting gigs on a daily basis. So yeah, I know that a lot of money exchange hands. The global digital economy size is about 11.5 trillion USD. Nigeria should be about 6 billion USD. I do not think that $2.4 billion on a daily basis is a realistic figure given the size of our economy.
What do you think is more realistic?
So I would say maybe if you say $5 to $6 billion annually divided by 365, that would be a decent figure. That should be maybe around, I can't think of the top of my head now, but maybe between hundreds of millions of USD, or maybe 100, 200 on a daily basis. That is fair, or maybe 50 million, something around that range, but that's just a very rough, wild guesstimate. But I wouldn't be thinking in the space of billions of dollars a day. I mean, how much do we even make from oil and gas on a daily basis that Twitter alone will now be giving us that much loss?
Okay. All right. I'm going to ask you to hold on. Nigeria's government has said that Twitter has agreed to its conditions. We want to look at the business side of those conditions when we come back after this break. You're watching Business Edge, and there are a lot of conversations to be had 2 days after Nigeria's government lifted the suspension on Twitter. Now, Nigeria's economy and even government have become increasingly reliant on digital media. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics show that the ICT sector was the fastest growing sector of Nigeria and has proven vital for economic diversification. What impact did the suspension have on the sector? The Nigerian government has also said that Twitter has agreed to meet its conditions. After the break, we'll get into the business side of those conditions. Stay with us. And this is Business Edge. We're looking at the cost of Nigeria's Twitter suspension. Joining me is Ayo Bankole Akintujoye. He's a strategic expert and the convener of the Lagos SME Bootcamp. Now, in recent years, a number of countries have blocked particular applications, shutting down specific services like instant messaging and voice over internet protocol calling, turning off mobile telecommunication services, or disrupting the entire internet. Those actions separate people from their family, friends, and livelihoods, and also undermine economic growth, interfering with the startup ecosystem and threatening social stability by interrupting economic activity. So, Ayo, I want us to look at this now from an investor standpoint. And if I was an investor who wanted to get into Nigeria's growing tech space, startup ecosystem, what would this tell me? What would this suspension that lasted 222 days tell me about the Nigerian economy or the Nigerian sector that I want to invest in? What conclusions do you think an investor would draw from what has happened?
I mean, it will simply tell you that, the political environment in Nigeria is volatile. That's what it simply tells you. It simply tells you that we are led by, individuals that do not understand economic or technology fundamentals. And it's simple. You want to drive a digital economy. That's what the government has claimed to be its agenda. What are the elements of a digital economy? One, you have digital infrastructure, right? Where are we on digital infrastructure? We're still very poor. And, our broadband penetration is still very low. We have a household penetration of about 0.04% as of 2018, which is below the African regional average of 0.6 and below, world average of 13.6%, right? You have digital financial services. Over 60 million Nigerians, adult Nigerians, do not have bank accounts, right? And we haven't done much around that side. You have digital entrepreneurship, which is where a lot of brilliant young entrepreneurs are driving innovation to support the economy. Government is stifling the guys around that area through their agencies and through these types of arbitrary bans, right? You have digital skills, which is still very low, literacy level and all of these things. And then you have digital platforms, right? Now, we've tried to do as much as we can using digital platforms, even though the infrastructure is poor. And then a government that then claims to be serious about driving digital economy then decides to clamp down on one of the most fertile platforms that exists, right? Meaning that, okay, the fifth of these 5 elements, which seem to even be taking a lot of traction, you are then clamping down on it again, in addition to what you've done around clamping down on entrepreneurship, clamping down on digital financial services. So it simply means that, look, it simply tells me as an investor that, man, this government is not serious about digital economy. Fortunately, investors have been able to separate the seriousness or understanding or exposure or finesse or otherwise of our government from the innovation and entrepreneurship and creativity of the young people. So that's why you see that irrespective of all of these volatile political regulations and policy regulations, you see that the people in the tech space still keep getting a lot of funding because the world connects with Nigeria's creativity and innovation.
Okay, very valid point there. Now, let's look at this in terms of the conditions that Nigeria set for Twitter, and they've said that the company has agreed to. The statement that announced the suspension being lifted said that Twitter has agreed to 1, register in Nigeria during the first quarter of 2022, 2, appoint a designated country representative, 3, comply with tax obligations in Nigeria, 4, enroll Nigeria in its portal for direct communications between government officials and Twitter to manage prohibited content that violates Twitter community rules, and 5, act respectfully with acknowledgement of Nigerian laws. When you look at these conditions and the business side of it, setting up an office, which will come with some sort of outcost and, of course, hiring for the company and paying taxes, what conclusions do you reach about the conditions or what the Nigerian government was thinking in putting these conditions out?
Okay, so to be fair, it's to the interest of Nigeria if Twitter opens office in Nigeria. But again, let's look at those conditions. None of it has been met. All of it are still promissory. Nigeria, they're going to register by Q1 2022. You could as well have gotten them to make all of these commitments without necessarily banning them. And you're suspending them. And this entire banning suspension strategy is Stone Age governance. You want to drive conversations with the global platform to invest in your economy. You don't start by suspending their operations, right? If you wanted to suspend their operations, I beg your pardon, if you wanted them to register, you simply issue them, notices, and then you begin, negotiations. You don't suspend. It's clear and that we are being economical with the truth as the real motive and intent for this. If it's just to register as an entity in Nigeria, I don't think that requires banning. If it's to come and physically set up an office here, I'm not aware that you can compel a global organization that is running on digital infrastructure to set up a physical office before they can operate in your country, except you want to lock your country from a global wave, right, and trend. And then what does acknowledgement with Nigerian laws mean? Acknowledge what law? What law has not been acknowledged before, right? Is the president coming on a digital platform to threaten a certain set of people or individuals making statements that are unguarded, which Twitter takes off? Is that not acknowledging? What does respectful acknowledgement mean, right? If we have our laws and you see that Twitter is in contravention of those laws, you take them to court, right? The courts are there. You have execution channels for executing your laws, right? You don't suspend a platform because you want them to respectfully acknowledge your law. I don't even know what that means, to be honest. So you can see that those things, I do not agree, or I do not believe that we've won this battle. I think that we have to suspend it because clearly there are political implications of, I told you, Twitter has become the world's biggest digital platform in driving political propaganda. So in the Nigerian government, especially the APC regime, came into power in 2015, largely driven by huge propaganda that was channeled via Twitter and other social media platforms. And they know that they cannot afford not to have that tool at their disposal going into 2023. I believe that is what this is about, and not all the economic conditions.
But let me stick with one of those conditions because it actually has now been put into law with the passing of the finance bill of 2021, and that has to do with paying of taxes. And that part of the law actually talks about non-resident foreign, almost digital technology companies that are making revenue from Nigeria. And Twitter falls under this. How do you think that particular thing will play out? Because that's not, quote unquote, aimed at Twitter. That's part of now Nigeria's finance laws that's dealing with companies such as Twitter. So how do you think that will play out?
No, that's a brilliant regulation. I mean, that Finance Act element is amazing, right? So it's so that we don't leave money on the table because we are unable to capture revenue and economic activities that happen on the digital space. That's brilliant, which brings us back to what I was saying earlier, that we did not need to suspend anybody before we came up with that law, and we do not even need to suspend anybody before we execute it. We do not need any of them to be physically here. Amazon doesn't have to be physically here. Facebook doesn't have to be physically here. Twitter doesn't have to be physically here before we can implement those regulations. They are not in all countries all over the world, and countries in several countries all over the world have found ways to tax them. So again, everything on that list are things we could have achieved without suspending Twitter. So I do not believe that while I agree that law is excellent, we need to tax these guys, we need to regulate them in a way that still protects the sanctity of freedom of speech and protects the rights of Nigerians to effectively communicate between themselves and between their leadership.